Hi everyone, I've had a few people asking about percentages. We didn't have a chance to cover that while we're still in school. So here's a quick introduction. So percentage, that's the symbol there, that means out of 100. So if you ever see 34%, that means 34 out of 100, or 34 hundredths. 6% is 6 out of 100. Then 100% is 100 hundredths, which is a full amount, full whole, just one. So say you're giving 100% effort, that means complete effort. That's as much as you can give. Or if you're paying 100% of the price, then you're paying the full price. Now we can see that the other way, starting with a fraction. So if you had 7 out of 100, well, that's 7%, 7 out of 100. 24 over 100, well, that's 24%, 24 out of 100. Now there's some key percentage facts that we just need to know. A lot of you might already know that 50% is the same as a half. So if you've got 50% off, then you're paying half the price. Let me show you how that's true. So 50% means 50 out of 100. Well, actually, no, 50 out of 100 is the same, equivalent to a half. Because if I divide both the top and bottom by 50, 50 divided by 50 is 1, 100 divided by 50 is 2. So 50% equals a half. We just really need to know that. 25%, or 25% is a quarter. It's half of 50%. I'm going to show you using this strategy here. So we've got 25 out of 100. I can simplify that fraction, find an equivalent fraction, by dividing top and bottom by the same thing. So I can divide both the numerator and the denominator by 25. 25 divided by 25 is 1. 100 divided by 25 is 4. Therefore proving 25% is a quarter. Now 75% is 3 quarters. Again, I'll use that same strategy to prove it. 75% is 75 divided by 100. Now to simplify that fraction, find an equivalent fraction that involves smaller numbers, I can divide the top and bottom by 25. So if I divide the top by 25, divide the bottom by 25, as long as I do the same to top and bottom, that's 3, that's 4. So 75% is 3 quarters. So there's the 3 facts there I just need to know. 50% is a half, 25% a quarter, 75% 3 quarters, and finally for now 10%, well that's 10 over 100. If I want to simplify that fraction, I need to think of a number that I can divide both the numerator and the denominator by. So those numbers, 10 and 100, are both in the 10 times table. So I'm going to divide top and bottom by 10. 10 divided by 10 is 1, 100 divided by 10 is 10, so I know 10% is the same as a tenth. So there's 4 facts there, see if you can remember those 4 facts. So now I'm going to use those key facts that I've got at the top here to work out some percentages of amounts. So I'm trying to work out 50% of 20. Well, if I'm new to percentages, I might find that a bit tricky, but actually if I remember that 50% is half, well, half of £20 I can do nice and easily. Half of £20 is £10. Next one, 25% of £16. Well, I know 25% is the same as a quarter, so I'm finding a quarter of £16. I find a quarter by dividing by 4. 16 divided by 4 is £4. Then 10% of £60. If I know 10% is a tenth, to find a tenth I just divide by 10. So 60 divided by 10 is 6. Let's talk a little bit about changing fractions to percentages. Now from what we've learned so far, we know percentage means out of 100. So this fraction says 7 out of 100, so we know that's just 7%. But it's trickier when the denominator of the fraction we're given isn't 100. So what we need to do, we need to use our knowledge of equivalent fractions. We need to find equivalent fractions. Let's start with 6/10. An equivalent fraction that's the same as 6/10 but has 100 as the denominator. So I know I want 100 at the bottom. So I want a fraction that's worth the same as 6/10 but expressed with 100 at the bottom. This is where our curly arrows come in. Remember, whatever I do to the top, I must do to the bottom. So in order to get from 10 to 100, I times by 10. So I must do the same on the top. 6 times 10 is 60. So now I've got 60 over 100, or 60 out of 100. So I know that is 60%. So I know 6/10, which is the same as 60 hundredths, is 60%. Let's try the same over here. So I've got 2/5, but I know to change it into a percentage, I want a denominator of 100. So I need to think about, how do I get from 5 to 100? What do I times 5 by to make 100? Well, I know I do 5 times 20. And because I've times the denominator by 20, I must do the same at the top to keep it equivalent. 2 times 20 is 40. So that's 40 out of 100, so I know that must be 40%. Final example, 9/20. Again, the denominator is not 100 yet, so I'm going to find an equivalent fraction with 100 at the bottom. So what do I times 20 by to make 100? I times it by 5. And because I've times the bottom by 5, I must times the top by 5. 9 times 5 is 45. So that's 45 out of 100. That must be 45%. So 9/20 is the same as 45%. Now let's have a look at decimals and percentages. Now we change between the two. So actually fractions, decimals and percentages are all ways of showing part of a whole. So it's really important to know how to change between all three of them. So here we've got 0.34. And here I'm using our decimal place value knowledge. So I know in this column after the decimal point is tenths, then we've got our hundredths. Now, before I change it to a percentage, I'm going to change it to a fraction. So I know if there's 3/10 and 4/100, the last digit there is in the hundredths column. So I can write that as 34. And it's hundredths because the last digit is in the hundredths column. And now if it's in hundredths, nice and easy to change it to percentage because I know it's 34 out of 100. Same with this one. So we've got a 76, 7 and a 6 there. Because the last digit is in the hundredths column, it's over 100. I know that 76 out of 100 is 76%. Now it gets a bit trickier where there's only one decimal place. So our first instinct would be to write just 9%. But actually let's change it to a fraction first and see if we're right. So I know that's 9/10 because the 9's in the 10th column, 9 out of 10. Now that's not out of 100 yet. So I'm going to use my knowledge of equivalent fractions to write that over 100 before I change it to percentage, because percentage means out of 100. To get from 10 to 100, I times by 10, and whatever I do to the bottom, I must do to the top. 9 times 10 is 90, so 0.9 is actually the same as 90 hundredths, 90 out of 100, which is 90%. So I do need to watch out and look at the decimal place value to check rather than just writing the first digit and sticking a percentage symbol on the end. Let's go the other way around then. If we know 73%, percent means out of 100, so that's 73 out of 100, which is 73 hundredths. So if I get my decimal place value, so I've got a decimal point here, tenths and hundredths. Well, I know that must be, the 3 must go there because it's out of 100, 7 there, and the 0 there, 0.73. Now once you get really familiar with percentages, you might just want to skip out the middle bit and go straight to 0.73. For example, 64%, well I know that's 64 hundredths, which from my decimal work so far in year 5 I know 0.64. Now again, be careful if there's just one digit there. It's really easy to think, oh, that must be 0.8. But let's check with our place value. I know 8% means 8 out of 100. That's 8 hundredths. And if I go back to my place value, I've got a 0 decimal point, I've got tenths and hundredths. Now that's 8 hundredths, so the 8 must come under the hundredths column, and that must be a 0. So it's 0.08, not 0.8. So it's always really important to remember your decimal place value here. To finish off this session on fractions, decimals and percentages, we're going to look at how we can convert fractions to decimals now. Then we know how to convert between all three of fractions, decimals and percentages. So say we've got the fraction 4/10. If I'm changing that to a decimal, and if my decimal point's here, the next column is the 10th column. So I put the 4 in there, that's 4/10. So I know 4/10 is the same as 0.4. If I've got 12 hundredths, so I've got my tenths and hundredths after the decimal point here. So I know that the last digit's in the hundredths because the fraction's out of 100. So the 2 goes there and the 1 must go there, 0.12. From our decimal work so far, these are quite familiar to us. The tricky thing is when the denominator is not 10 or 100 or 1,000. So let's have a look at 3/5 as an example. So what I need to do, I need to find an equivalent fraction to 3/5 that either has 10 or 100 at the bottom. Now, I know that I can times 5 by 2 to make 10, so let's go for 10. So again, I'm just finding an equivalent fraction worth the same value, but just with 10 at the bottom. So to get from 5 to 10, I times by 2. So I do the same to the top. 3 times 2 is 6. So know that 3/5 is the same as 6/10. I know 6/10 can be written as 0.6, because that's the 10th column there. Go to 9/20. Again, same thing. I need to have a denominator of 10 or 100 or 1000. Now I can make 20 into 100 by timesing by 5. And whatever I do to the bottom, I need to do to the top. 9 times 5 is 45. That's 45 hundredths, which would be 0.45, with the tenths and the hundredths there. Now this gets slightly trickier when you have a fraction like 3/8. Problem with 3/8 is that 8 isn't a multiple of 10, 100 or 1000. There's nothing I can times it by to get it to be 10 or 100. So I'm going to have to approach it in a slightly different way. And I can do this using our short division bus stop method. Because I know a fraction is just basically the top number divided by the bottom number. So that's 3 divided by 8. It's another way of looking at fractions. So I have 3 and I divide it by 8. Now I know straight away this is going to be less than 0. So I know my answer is going to be a decimal. So I'm going to add some decimal points here. So I've got a decimal point after 3 and just there's no 10s, no 100s there. I'm going to put those in now. And when I'm doing short division, bus stop division with the decimal just goes directly above where it is underneath the bus stop. So I'm going to put that in before I even start. Then I carry on bus stop division as normal. If you're not sure about that, have a look at the video that I've posted on the web page that Miss Jarvie did on short division. So let's start at the beginning. How many 8s fit into 3? Well, none. So I've got to carry over that 3 that I've not used. How many 8s fit into 30? Well, that would be 3. 3 8s, 24. That means I've got 6 left over. So, how many 8s fit into 60? Well, I know 7 8s are 56. So I've got 4 left over. And then because I've now gone to the hundreds column here, I can just put another 0 in because there's no hundreds there, but I can still carry over there. How many 8s fit into 40? It's 5. So actually, 3/8, or 3 divided by 8, is 0.375. So that's how I can convert those tricky fractions into decimals.